Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, insurance broker to the stars. Business owners often come to me and they go, hey, I know I need E&O insurance, or I need cyber insurance, or employment practices insurance. But what does that really mean? What's kind of the 30,000 foot view of what it covers or it doesn't cover? Am I missing some other type of insurance? How does all of this work? So as a fellow business owner, I'm putting together just a plain language breakdown of the most common types of insurance that we're going to see out there. Now, before we begin, this is my latest book, Damage Control, Cyber Insurance and Compliance. If you want to download that, that is the link where you can download it for free. All right, now jumping into it, this is, like I said, the 30,000 foot view, the 80-20. Each of these different types of policies, it depends on the insurance company you go with. It depends on endorsements and exclusions and carve-backs, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just generally speaking, I'm not providing any official insurance or legal advice for you here. Just some considerations. Now, these are the common types of insurances that we're going to see for businesses. And I'll put a link down in the description below with little timestamps. So if you're already familiar with one specific type of coverage, then you can just bounce to the coverage that you're considering. Now, with these, I will say, these are the most common types. At the very bottom there, you're going to see pollution, artwork, life, health, et cetera, et cetera. There are literally thousands of different types of insurance policies that are out there. With that, if you need kind of those more niche areas, you'll probably already know about that. When in doubt, obviously speak to a competent attorney to assist you with that. And just for your own benefit, just so you know, I only really do the ones in gold. All the stuff in white, that's more of a general insurance agent type coverage area, but this is really just for your own benefit. And before we get too far into it, my voice is really dry today. So if you see me taking a sip of water, I apologize in advance. Now, when you're looking at all those different types of insurance policies, you're probably sitting there going, oh my God, how do I just remember all of this stuff? Well, an easy way to think about it is really the following. What one policy would exclude may be covered in a different type of policy. So for example, your E&O policy, that's generally for professional services rendered. You rendered a service to a client. If they allege they were damaged because of the services you rendered, they could bring a claim against you, potentially covered under your E&O policy. That policy, your E&O policy, would likely exclude insured versus insured, right? So it's not meant for if an employee sues your business or a partner sues a partner. That makes sense. So let's say you're worried and you're like, well, what happens if an employee sues management? Well, you're probably not going to have any coverage under your E&O policy. Hence, you would need an employment practices policy. Therefore, a different line of insurance. Now, there could be some minor overlaps there. Don't get too hung up on there, but really kind of the most common one we're going to see is going to be some type of little tiny cyber endorsement on a business owner's policy or a commercial general liability policy. Broadly speaking, you really want to avoid those wherever possible. I'll put a link down below in the description talking about how that could affect your deductible, and you could be taking on more risk than you thought. And of course, ask your attorney. Depending upon what type of business you are, what state you're located in, some of these insurance policies may just be legally required anyways. So don't forget to kind of cover that base as well. Now, what might these policies actually cover? And once again, it depends on the insurance company. Read your own policy. I'm not providing any official insurance or legal advice here, but let's first talk about the CGL, also known as kind of colloquially just your general liability policy. Well, it's generally for common torts, so that's wrongful act or infringement of a right, which leads to a civil liability. That may sound like a mouthful, and you're probably going, what in the hell does that mean? Well, kind of think about the common coverages here. Bodily injuries. Somebody slips and falls at your business. Property damage. So you damage somebody else's property while completing work. Advertising or personal injuries. Some allegation of libel, slander, defamation, copyright infringement, that type of thing. And what could that really cover? It could cover the attorney's fees, damages awarded to a plaintiff, that type of thing. Now, next we're going to get into a business owner's policy. And there's a lot of confusion here between CGLs and BOPs, but here's the primary difference. A BOP is essentially a CGL plus property protection. So what does that mean? It could include the following. Coverage for business property that's lost due to like fire, theft, windstorm, rainstorm, some flooding, kind of situationally dependent, and potentially business interruption for covered property events. That would be fire, theft, etc., that forces your business to halt operations. So let's say a fire burns down your building. Well, maybe you've got coverage in there for the property you lost that was in that building, as well as the business interruption that your business could experience due to that fire. Now, higher risk industries may not even get this. An example would be construction. So generally like professional lines, which is a lot of what I deal with. So MSPs, people in the technology sphere, CPA firms, architects, lawyers, engineers, generally they can get a BOP, but if you're in something like construction or manufacturing, you may not be able to get a BOP. There's a different type of policy for you. Next is going to be hired and non-owned auto insurance. So, maybe you're thinking to yourself, hey, my business doesn't own a car. What do I need this for? Well, it's not really that simple. Generally, it provides liability for bodily injury and property damage caused by you or your employee while driving for work. So let's say you've got techs and they're going out to a work site and they are driving their personal automobile for that. Then you may need hired and non-owned auto insurance. So what would be an example? Like I just said, employee driving to a client's office is involved in a wreck. Your business could then be sued, right? So some type of vicarious liability there for some type of negligence. That could be the employee's vehicle was not properly maintained. The employee has a poor driving record, and there's allegations that you as a business owner should have known that you never should have put them on the road to conduct business in your business's name. Employee has insurance that is lapsed. Now, it's unlikely to pay for the collision damage for that vehicle, right? What it is for is the bodily injury and property damage, right? If your business is sued somehow like for negligence there. And typically this is going to be added via the general liability insurance policy or your BOP. Moving on, commercial umbrella policies. This is also often misunderstood. Generally, you're going to see two types of broad coverages here with an umbrella policy. One, coverage above other insurance policies, also known as an underlying policy, and coverage for liability with no underlying insurance. So what is this really for? It's like, hey, if you need more insurance, you're trying to cover gaps in insurance, generally with your general liability policies, your commercial auto insurance, aka the hired and non-owned auto, workers' compensation, that type of thing. It's like additional extra insurance for the general lines of insurance that we saw in the beginning in white. Next, we're going to see workers' compensation. Generally, that's for medical and wage benefits to employees who become injured or ill at work. That could be coverage. It's often mandated by the states, and they often are very, very specific about what type of language has to go into a workers' compensation policy. And it's really just part of the social contract. So a lot of it is your business buys workers' compensation insurance, and because of that, you may be protected from these civil suits that could be brought by workers who became injured or ill on the job. Now, do you need workers' comp if you only have, say, contract workers like 1099s? They're not technically employees because they're W-2s. I'm not your attorney. I have no idea. I don't know the laws of your states. So please seek legal advice in that particular circumstance. All right, next, errors and omissions insurance. Now we're getting into my bread and butter. It's also known as professional liability insurance, and you generally want to look for industry-specific policies. So these E&O policies generally geared towards specific industries, types of businesses. So that could be, if you're an MSP, a tech E&O policy. If you're a CPA firm, accountant's professional liability insurance. If you're an RIA, there's a specific type of insurance for you. Same with lawyers, E&O insurance, same with architects, engineers, that type of thing. Now, very niche businesses may be covered under something called a miscellaneous E&O policy, or kind of just the general E&O policy, and then have some type of endorsement put onto it. But if you're in a field that's well established, like MSPs, accountants, architects, lawyers, engineers, generally you want to avoid those miscellaneous policies because they tend to be much more narrow than what you could find on the open market for that specific type of business operation. And generally those policies that are on the open market, they're built just for your type of business, have much better coverage for you. Now, once again, it generally covers damages for professional services rendered. You have to be rendering some type of professional service, and then a person has to say, hey, I was damaged because of your professional service. So what would be an example of this damage for professional services rendered? Let's say you're a wealth advisor, you provided allegedly negligent investment advice, or you're an MSP, you misconfigured a firewall, and because of that, your client had some type of cyber event. Or you're a CPA firm and you missed some type of tax deduction, and because of that, your client says, hey, I was damaged because of whatever you did, this professional services you rendered, therefore I'm going to bring a claim, aka, broadly speaking, a lawsuit. That's what this type of insurance is for. Next, let's talk about cyber insurance. Now, we can really kind of think of this as like two different sides to it. First is going to be third-party liability. So that would be like your business is sued after some type of cyber event. That could be somebody saying you owe them money. So that could be payment card industry data security standards. It could be a client. It could be some sort of regulator. It could be some other random third party. The other side to this is going to be first-party liability. That's your business incurs losses following a cyber event. So that could be breach notification letters. That could be dealing with ransomware or a data breach or loss of funds. And you'll see that right here. Now, beware the overlapping coverage. Once again, you really want to try and avoid, in most cases, having all kinds of little cyber coverages all over. And insurance agents are famous for doing this in the general insurance line, where they're like, oh, well, we have to add this cyber endorsement on a business owner's policy, or they're going to get it from some other guy. No, that's just ridiculous. Generally, what happens there is something called a mutually repugnant other insurance clause, which means, well, let me give you an example. If you bought a house and you bought two different homeowners policies for that house, and then your house burns down, do you really think you're going to get twice the value of your home back in insurance? Probably not going to happen, because the courts don't want to encourage that. Society doesn't want to encourage that. And the insurance industry definitely doesn't want to encourage that. Insurance is about making you whole again. You're not really supposed to profit from insurance. So what could happen there is you might end up paying both deductibles. So now you've taken on way more risk in a monetary sense than you otherwise thought. And you're probably only going to get the most insurance you're going to find on any one of those policies. It also gets really messy, and insurance companies fight, and it just turns into a mess. So broadly speaking, you typically want to avoid having cyber insurance kind of all over the place. Generally, for most businesses, a standalone cyber policy is really the most appropriate way to try and cover many of those losses. If you're interested, I have a whole playlist on my YouTube channel here just dealing with cyber insurance. And situationally, I will say this for my MSPs out there: cyber insurance is actually tacked on to a tech E&O policy. So a tech E&O policy is really two things: errors and omissions insurance, which we just talked about, as well as cyber insurance, squished together into one big policy. Moving forward here, employment practices insurance. Once again, two sides to this. First party liability. Employee brings a claim against your business. Hey, I was sexually harassed here. You failed to adhere to whatever prevailing wage law, that kind of thing. Third-party liability. Liability brought by a non-employee. What could that really mean? Hey, you sent a staff member, a tech, out to a client site, and that guy was hitting on the girl working at the front desk, and she's alleging some type of sexual harassment or sexual discrimination. That could be the third-party liability. So common kind of areas where businesses would be concerned and want to purchase an employment practices insurance policy: sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, unjust termination or retaliation, failure to hire, workplace harassment, et cetera, et cetera. All right, D&O insurance. This is getting into more of the niche area. It's generally to protect the personal assets of corporate directors, officers, and or board members. So if you are on, let's say you're on the board of a local nonprofit, pretty good chance that that local nonprofit needs to have a D&O policy. Let's say you are the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. You're probably going to have a D&O policy for that business. Let's say you're a very high net worth individual and you are running a business. You own likely that business, well, then there's probably going to be some type of D&O policy there because people could come after you just because you look like you have a lot of money. Now, this is closely tied to the laws dealing with corporate governance, corporate law, and fiduciary liability. It could also include coverage for defense costs and damages awarded to the plaintiff, and often held by nonprofits, as I said before. Coverage comes inside, so I'm not going to delve too far into that. This is literally a section in a book that I've written, but it's structured entirely different than what you're going to see other types of insurance. Frequently, just because of the sensitive nature of these types of policies, where very important people are trying to keep their personal assets from being seized, these types of policies are very often reviewed by a qualified attorney at least once a year. Moving on here, excess insurance. So excess insurance, don't confuse this with umbrella insurance. We're going to go over that here in a second. Generally meant to cover claims, expenses, and damages above a primary policy. Now, this can come in various types. There's various types of forms for excess insurance. Most often we see something called a follow form, which means it just follows the form of the primary policy. These are situationally used. So what would an example be? You have a contractual requirement to carry $10 million of E&O insurance, but you currently only have a $5 million E&O insurance policy. Then you start looking around and you're like, hey, there's no one single insurance company that's going to offer me a $10 million E&O policy. That's where excess insurance would come in. So you would have $5 million of insurance in excess of the $5 million E&O policy that you currently carry. Now, generally, these are found in the professional lines, so E&O, cyber, EPLI, that type of thing. Now, just to avoid the confusion, I went ahead and put this slide in here. Excess versus umbrella insurance. Umbrellas might be used to cover some losses where there's no underlying insurance, generally for the general insurance lines area. So that would be your CGL, your BOP, workers' comp potentially. Excess insurance, used to cover losses, but only when there's an underlying policy already there, typically in professional lines, E&O insurance, cyber, EPLI, that type of policy. All right, now we're almost done here. What about all these things? Additional non-contributory clauses, additional named insured provisions, waivers of subrogation, carve-backs, et cetera, et cetera. It really just depends. That's why you actually need to talk to a knowledgeable insurance guy. Ask your insurance agent or your broker. Typically what's going to happen is we have to send off those particular contractual requirements or requests to the underwriter for final approval there, because it does get quite technical. A knowledgeable insurance guy should be able to explain what those mean, but very rarely will he be able to say, oh yeah, you're good, right? I'll say generally you just want to check with the insurance company before you kind of go off into the weeds for that type of thing, because that is very technical contractual language. All right, so in total, each policy really just does exist for a reason. So now you kind of know, okay, what are these different policies for? You can kind of see the breakdown amongst them. And what you will need in your business, it's going to depend. It really just varies. It depends on what you're doing. It depends on where you're located. It depends on really even what your particular risk tolerance is. So some business owners are like, hey, I've only got one employee. I don't need an EPLI policy. Whereas other business owners are going to say, hey, you know what? I've got an employee now. I want to get that employment practices policy just to be safe. At the very least, what you can do is you can just go back to the part of the presentation where I listed all those insurances out, and you can just talk to your insurance guy and just kind of go down the list and say, hey, do you think these are right for me, or do you think they're necessary? As I've said before, some may be legally required, and please seek out expertise. All right, so we, being the insurance community, we should add value to what's going on here, right? We're not here to just take your money once a year, right? There should be some type of value there. So remember, each insurance policy really has three parts. You have the application, you have the policy proper, and then you have compliance with the policy. So there's three parts to every policy that you need to keep in mind there. All three of those could potentially get you in trouble if you're not appropriately trained on those. So please seek out a competent a competent, I know it's rare, but seek out a competent insurance broker to try and help you with the application to make sure you're not committing some type of material misrepresentation. Looking at the policy language, make sure that's the appropriate type of policy and it has the appropriate language. And then if there's any crazy exclusions in there or specific rules you have to abide by. And that's really where the compliance aspect comes into it. So when you have an insurance policy, it's not a, hey, I bought it, I'm good for the year, I don't need to think about it until my renewal comes around. Especially when you start getting the professional lines of insurance, there's a lot more to it. I have a whole playlist evolving around that stuff. If you want to look at the most important insurance lesson I can teach you, I will put that linked up above. And when in doubt, please seek competent legal counsel. Generally, I hate to besmirch my industry here, but generally speaking, competent legal counsel tends to be much brighter than the average insurance guy. So if you have questions, seek out competent legal counsel. All right, with that, I hope you found this video useful and you learned something today. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. New videos out every Thursday. Right above me, you will see another video that you may enjoy. And if you look over there, you will see my beautiful face where you can click and subscribe to my channel. All right, with that, stay safe.